It's very exciting to be with real live, warm-blooded, breathing, 3D humans with whole bodies. Welcome to our Padmasambhava Day celebrations at North London, if you're here, and to everybody at home. And it's a very exciting day, isn't it? Because not only is this part of North London's process of trying to make a kind of mixed model that people can come here if they can and can practice from home, but also today is going to be the celebration of a whole series. 4 people are going to become Mitras today, and that's a really special day. It's a special day, hopefully, for you. And also it's a really special day actually to witness somebody becoming a Mitra as well. It's a really, my experience of it has been a very joyous thing. So I hope you really enjoy the day, the afternoon. So my name is Dhammamegha, almost forgot that bit. And I've been living in London for nearly 18 months now. And I occasionally partake in North London events. So I'm sort of a North London Dhammacharani, but actually I haven't met many of you, so this is a really lovely way to meet you. And my job today is to find ways of introducing, connecting, possibly experiencing some of the qualities of the great Guru Padmasambhava. It's a Padmasambhava celebration today. And some of you might already be Padmasambhava practitioners and know a lot about him and his symbolism and his history. And for some of you, this might be a new introduction. The history, even taking one look at that tanka there, you will see he's the central figure. That the history and the symbolism of Padmasambhava is incredibly rich. There's lots and lots and lots of layers to him. And we could really spend, many people do, spend a lifetime exploring those layers. So anything that I say today will be just a sort of scratching the surface, just a focus on some aspects of him. But all of the elements of Padmasambhava have to do with transformation, the great transformation from human being to Buddha, from asleep to awake, from ignorant to wise, from cut off, alienated to loving. So we're talking about this great process of transformation, and all of us are engaged in it in some way or another, otherwise we wouldn't be here. So, but I'm not going to get all encyclopedic on you. I'm not going to give you loads and loads of pieces of information about Padmasambhava. I'm just going to do a little introduction to some of the sort of history of him as a figure, as a personality, as a form, and then focus on 2 things. The 2 things I want to talk about really are about Padmasambhava's smile and Padmasambhava's robes. And we'll see what that has to do with transformation in a little bit. But it's also a really good day to think about, to connect with Padmasambhava when we're making a commitment. In a way, we do that every time we take the refuges and precepts. We connect with something that's a representation of what is of value to us. But particularly when you make a commitment, or rather you come into a ceremony in which your commitment is recognized and witnessed, is a fundamental part of transformation. Commitment is a kind of magic event in the process of transformation. So let's start with an introduction. So Padmasambhava, his name means the lotus born. So Padma means lotus, and you'll have encountered the word bhavana in metta bhavana. It's the same thing, sambhava. So becoming or birthing, originating. And he was born from a lotus. And there he sits on a brilliant red lotus. And he's also known as the precious guru, the precious teacher, Guru Rinpoche. And the story of Padmasambhava is intimately tied with the story of the arrival of the Dharma in Tibet. And the story goes that the king of Tibet, Trisong Detsum, in the 8th century, had some engagement with Buddhism and wanted to bring Buddhism to the country. So he invited a pandit from Nepal, who had a great reputation as a teacher, and Santa Rakshita was his name, invited him to come and found a monastery and start the teachings. He was a very learned man. And he came to Tibet and he tried to found this monastery. And it was a bit like one of those days when nothing goes right, except it was a couple of years. It was sort of like, felt like all the forces were against him. They couldn't really get a grip on establishing the monastery. There was trouble with the building. There was trouble with other people's jealousy. There was local practitioners who resisted the introduction of Buddhism. And eventually, Santa Rakshita said to the king, actually, I'm not really up for the job on my own. And if you really want to do this, then you need to invite Padmasambhava to come and help you. I'm just going to do something weird. I've got reading glasses, but then I can't see you. Or I've got seeing you glasses, but then I can't read. So I'm going to go for seeing you now. So I'll tell you a little bit of, so Padmasambhava was called, but let's go back to his birth, because he has a rather magic and miraculous story of his birth. So he was said to have been born as an 8-year-old child from Amitabha in a bowl of a giant red lotus. So it's one of those great magic stories of the beginning of a bodhisattva. And of course, Amitabha is the Bodhisattva, the Buddha of compassion. So one thing we should know about Padmasambhava is that he was born of compassion. And he was clearly somebody special. Actually, I'm going to go off piste now. One of the things he said later in life, which I really love actually, was, may I die an ordinary man. Really, really interesting aspiration for somebody who has this sort of miraculous birth. That one of the ways of conceiving of total liberation is to be liberated from the need to be special. Kind of interesting idea. But anyway, he was a very special lad, and he was adopted by a king, the king of Udayana, and he was raised as his son. And a bit like the story of the Buddha, he was due to be the inheritor of the throne. But he had different ideas. He wanted to be a monk. He didn't want to take on that role. So as a young man, he got into quite a lot of trouble. He was accused of murdering people. People tried to kill him. He ran away. They tried to burn him alive. It didn't work. You get the gist of it. Anyway, he ran away from that role, that responsibility, and he lived in a charnel ground for 5 years practicing after he left home. So that's a strong image, isn't it? So a charnel ground is not just a graveyard. It's not just where people's bodies are buried or cremated. It's where bodies are just thrown down. So you can see the process of decomposition of the human body in a charnel ground. Very, very affecting, as you can imagine. So this is a strong image, isn't it? Like we're getting a sense of the strength of the character and the story of Padmasambhava. And this idea of the charnel ground is a real theme in Buddhist history, actually. And certainly in India, there were 8 renowned charnel grounds, and it said that the great meditators all meditated in the charnel grounds. So in a way, what we can take from that story is that Padmasambhava faced like the worst kind of existential fear that those of us who are born into a human body can face. And he dwelt there, and he became comfortable there. He overcame his own fears. And it's said that the charnel ground is always the birthplace of the siddhis, or the siddhas, those who have great power, because obviously you have to really be able to master your mind and your fear in that kind of circumstance. You might recognize the word siddha or siddhi from Amoga siddhi, for example, the capacity, he has one who has capability, one who has powers or accomplishments. One of the great accompanying figures of Padmasambhava's life are the Darkenis. And so the charnel grounds, he wouldn't have had other human companions, would he? He would have been there with the dead bodies and with wild animals, and it would have been a fearful place that other people wouldn't want to have been. But in the charnel grounds, the Darkenis show up, and the Darkenis, they're also called sky dancers, which I think is a lovely name. The sky dancers are there, and they are spontaneous wisdom, and they are accompanied by bliss. And if we put aside the idea of the charnel ground for a moment, we can think of those moments where we've somehow overcome a fear or overcome an inhibition, and there's a sort of rising of joy and delight. It's a bit like the Darkenis are personifications of that arising joy and delight, that bliss, that freedom, that capacity to suddenly move where you have been tied down before. So his companions in the charnel ground are the Darkenis. And we can think of the charnel grounds literally. There were people who practice and still do in those contexts, but we can also think of them as metaphorically, in terms of being willing to be in the places that scare us, being willing to be in the circumstances that challenge us. And a very dear friend of mine has had reason to have and a lifelong fear of death and dying. And many years ago now, she decided that the way to address that was to work in a hospice. So she's been doing that as a volunteer for the last 30 or 40 years, I think. And it's amazing, whenever I see her coming out, she goes and does the morning shifts in the hospice, and then when I see her afterwards sometimes, she's so grounded and so loving. It's not an ordeal anymore. What it is now is a real connection with truth and love and a sort of overcoming of fear. So we can think about the charnel grounds also as encounters with those things we'd rather not see, but that actually that encounter can liberate us. One of the Darkenis is Vajrayogini, probably the best known of them. And actually, I just wanted to read you a little section from a Vajrayogini puja, which brings in this idea of how we can think of these charnel grounds metaphorically. It's part of the confession section of that puja. I'll just read it to you. Please look on me with loving affection. So this is the practitioner speaking to the Darkeni. Please look on me with loving affection and lead me through the cremation ground of my mind. Help me to discard the carcasses of my limited perspective and the offal of pride and complacency, the withered skins of conceit, and the funeral ash of self that has made me dull or rigid and confused. Let me sit in the flames of your love until all my failings turn to rainbows. So this is the sort of, this is the great transformation that Padmasambhava himself goes through before he goes to Tibet. Right, back to our story. So where we have the king with a failed attempt to establish a monastery and this desperate call to Padmasambhava to come and help out because clearly they haven't managed to have success. And he goes to Tibet where he spends the rest of his human life anyway. These great stories about how long he lives, but certainly his human life was spent there. And he does something really interesting. The way in which it's spoken about is that he sees into the minds of the people around him, and he is able to name the forces of the psyche that are present, that are against the project, if he likes. And he converts those forces of the psyche to become protectors and workers of the Dharma. So something very, very powerful in this idea of being able to see and name the forces that are within us, within our society, that are contrary to the Dharma, if you like. And not just try and cut those off, but to try and convert those forces, to try and convert those energies into things that can help us on the path and things that can provide protection. Yeah. And the way he gets them to, aside from seeing them and naming them, he enters into, and he asks them to enter into an oath. They promise, they commit, they set an intention to be on the side of the Dharma, and that's how, in effect, they become part of the forces of the Dharma. So I think there's something even in that story of Padmasambhava about commitment, about naming. Like, all of you will not get a new name, but you'll get a new term, won't you? You'll become Mitras. What does it mean to become a Mitra? There's something of a significance in a name, in a word. So, yeah. In a way, that's how we that's how we tame ourselves, don't we? That's how we tame the forces in our mind, by bringing them into the path, bringing them onto the path with us, not excluding them, but bringing them along in all their forms. So Padmasambhava takes many forms. There are 8 traditional ones, but the one that you're most likely to see is that one over there. The royal form. He appears in the form of a king, and the one who offers initiation. So one who brings people into the path, into the Dharma, and into direct relationship with reality.
If you're still on technician stuff, Ratnaprabhu, I don't think we can hear what Dhammamegha is saying at the moment.
Yep, there's no sound.
Shall we try speaking again? See? Sorry, everyone at home, we have a technical problem. Is it working? Great. Okay. So the last thing I was saying was that he carries the staff with him, which is called the Inner Consort, which is a sort of symbol of his own integration, the integration of masculine and feminine energies, and the qualities of wisdom which are associated with the feminine in Tibet. And he wears this red cap, and on the top is a vulture's feather, because the vulture flies the highest. So he's yeah, very, very rich, many-layered symbolism in his appearance. And the 2 things I'll talk about a bit more in depth is he has Piercing eyes.
If anyone can hear us, the Zoom people, it's gone silent again for the Zoom people.
Are we just checking the lapel mic? Does that work? Yep. Sorry about that, everyone. Now I have to stop waving my arms about so much. Okay. And he's got these 3 robes on, and you'll see he wears a red robe on the outside, and then a yellow robe, and then a blue robe close to it, right next to his body. There's a book, in fact, you've got it over there, Ratnaprabha, called The Darkening Teachings. It's on that lovely pile. There it is. And it's got this very here it is. For sale now in the bookshop near you. There's this very enigmatic statement at the beginning of the Darkening Teachings, which is a collection written or stored by one of the consorts of Padmasabhava, Yeshit Sogyal, about Padmasabhava. And it starts with this. It says, descend with the view while ascending with the conduct. It is most essential to practice these two as a unity. Sort of the opening phrase of this whole collection of teachings. I'll say it again. Descend with the view while ascending with the conduct. It is essential to practice these two as a unity. I'll come back to that in a second. What does that mean? So I don't know what your background is, but when I was a child, I grew up in a very Christian household. In fact, my father was a Methodist minister, and I spent some of my childhood in a seminary, so I had a pretty serious Christian upbringing. And we used to go to church on Sundays, and the minister would always tell us that God was watching us. Whatever we did, God was watching us. And it's totally freaked me out as a child. I was like, there are times when I do not want to be watched, like going to the loo or picking my nose or stealing the last biscuit, you know. And worse still, it was said that like God would know everything that you thought or felt. And I remember feeling quite oppressed by this sense of visibility as a child. And I don't know whether you had any strong or mild version of that when you were growing up. But I think the reason why I found that teaching so difficult was because there's a view of who we are that underlies that. It's a bit like we're all trying to look okay on the surface, but deep, deep inside, we're sinners. That's the sort of view that's there. So it's like, even no matter how hard you pretend to be a nice person, like God will know your deepest secrets and your darkest heart and your doubts and all the rest of it. It's a sort of like model of the human being where we're kind of trying to be good on the outside, but we're sort of flawed on the inside. This is not the Dharmic view. Yeah. So what does it mean when Padmasambhava looks at us? Because that's one of the ways in which we relate to the figure of Padmasambhava. Like when we are in his presence, he's looking at us and he's seeing us. And the way he sees us is with this smile that is also wrathful, the smile that's also a little bit dangerous. So what does that mean? So like, I want to know what Padmasambhava sees when he looks at us. What is, we can ask ourselves as well, like, if Padmasambhava looks at you, what does he see? What does he see today? What does he see now as you're contemplating becoming a Mitra? What does he see when you're practicing? And I'd like to suggest that he sees two things, which is why there's a smile and it's dangerous. And we can go, this is a sort of thread of teaching that goes right back to early Buddhism. This idea that the mind or the consciousness is pure and luminous and full of infinite potential. And yet we are defiled by adventitious defilements, which according to the dictionary means happening as a result of an external factor or chance rather than a design or an inherent nature. Yeah. So the Buddhist view of the human is that we all have this capacity for enlightenment, we all have this possibility, and we're all conditioned, and we're conditioned in ways biologically, how our minds are set up in terms of greed, hatred, and delusion. So we have these defilements, but they don't say everything that there is to be said about us. Yeah. So that's quite abstract, isn't it? But I think all of us are taught to be ignorant. All of us are taught to turn away from our existential situation. All of us are taught to hate in particular ways, actually, to want things in particular way. Our whole structure is educated in the way that we grow up, and just in the fact that we have a soft body in a complex world that basically isn't designed to look after our every need. We sort of wish it was, don't we? But it's not actually designed to meet our needs. So we protect ourselves, we push people away, we seek to gain advantage, you know, all of those things. And what Buddhism says is that that is not our essential nature, and it's not the whole thing that's to be said about us. So when Padmasambhava looks at us, he sees both things. He sees both the fact of the possibility of our freedom and the fullness of the possibility of transformation, and the purity of our consciousness, this luminous mind that we all have. And he also sees the ways in which we are small, we are hurt, we are mean, we are scared. He can see them both. So the smile, in a way, is an encouraging smile. It's a way of looking at with kindly eyes. But he also wants us to be more than we maybe are at the moment in terms of how we're caught up in the defilements. He knows that we can do better, and he'd quite like to remind us of that fact anytime we look at him. I think it's really important, actually, particularly when we're thinking about these sort of semi-wrathful figures, to remember that the Bodhisattva always wants to see you. The Bodhisattva is always happy to see you, and that whether it's wrathful or peaceful in form, the Bodhisattva's only aim is your liberation. So whatever engagement there is an engagement out of compassion. So even the dangerous smile is dangerous only to that part of you that wants to stay small. It's liberating to that in you which is able to be free and loving and wise. Yeah. So we've got this idea of some kind of innate purity, luminous mind, total free, spacious consciousness. We also have this image of the jewel, like the jewel in the lotus, for example. This idea that actually each one of us is jewel-like, precious, illuminating, shiny, and that actually we seek to find, like the jewels can be found even in the dung heap, and the fact that it's in a dung heap doesn't mean that the jewel is not a jewel. Another one of the images is that we're all walking around with jewels secretly sewn into our coats, and we don't know. So we just have to start feeling around for the edges of our coats to find that actually we're rich beyond compare in qualities of value. And in a way, sort of Vajrasattva embodies this view of innate purity. So I think ideally, what we're trying to do in a Sangha context and what we're trying to do when we are friends as practitioners and when we are witnessing each other in our practice is to look at each other a bit like Padmasambhava looks at you. In other words, seeing possibility and potential and beauty in each other. And by seeing that, allowing it to be witnessed and allowing ourselves to express those qualities that sometimes in a slightly cynical world we're in, like faith, like sensitivity, like beauty, that can be quite hard to bring into relationships sometimes. Vulnerability, struggle, all of those things that actually we often try and cover up, we can show each other and we can be met with kindness. That's the... So in other words, our task as a Sangha is to sort of replicate the view that Padmasambhava might bring and Vajrasattva might bring when he looks at us. And let's face it, we don't always get that right, do we? Because all of us in the Sangha have our own adventitious defilements, even as we're working with them, working to overcome them. Yesterday I watched the third of the race conversations. I don't know if you've seen, there's been a series of conversations about race in the Sangha that Vimalasara has convened. And Maitrivir Nagarjuna, who's an order member from India, said this thing. He was talking about it in relation to race, but I thought it was really astute. He said, all of us have to learn to undo either the superiority view or the inferiority view. And he was talking about that in terms of race and how that can affect our adventitious defilements, how our sense of ourselves is structured. But of course, it can come from personality, it can come from gender, it can come from however it is that we think that we're better or worse than others. So if we can, the process of witnessing, the process of showing up, the process of making a commitment is about undoing our views of ourselves and each other such that we can be mutually liberating. So in a way, like becoming a Mitra, well, I'll speak, I don't know what your experience will be. It'll be very lovely to speak to you later after you've done the ceremony, but my own sense of becoming a Mitra when I did was one of the happiest days of my life, actually. Yeah, I think that's true. Was just a sense of actually being completely in love with the Dharma and like sort of wanting to honor that and wanting that not to be something I sort of just did on my own, sort of in my bedroom sort of thing, but to actually be in relation to people around me, whether they were Buddhist or not, to just say, actually, this is really important to me, and this feels like life-giving and positive, and I want to celebrate it. And to be able to do that, to actually have that seen, it was an extraordinary process of, well, of metta, but also of mudita. Like, I was so happy and other people were so happy for me in making that commitment. It just seemed like a very, well, it's a powerful thing to be seen, isn't it? It's a powerful thing to be seen in the things that are most important to you. So, yeah. So that's, so hopefully we can turn to each other to do that, and we can learn more and more to be able to see each other with the eyes that of the search for potential. In a way, that's what Kalyana Mitrata means, to be a friend of the beautiful in each of us. So let me go back to that slightly enigmatic quote at the beginning of the Darkening Teachings. Descend with the view while ascending with the conduct. It's most essential to practice these two as a unity. So in a way, to descend with the view is to get closer and closer to reality as it really is, and to become intimate with things. To descend also means to sort of clear away the veils of ignorance, of stereotyping, of assumptions, and get really close to what's actually happening, and to recognize the beautiful in that. And of course, that informs our ethical action, which is what ascending with the conduct means. Like when we see people in terms of their potential and in terms of their beauty, and we can see ourselves in that way as well, then we will act with much, much greater wisdom and much greater kindness to others and compassion to others. Mm. Yeah. How are we doing for time? Okay, okay, okay. So I want to turn now to something about ethical practice, or in a way, the resources of the tradition that are symbolized in the three robes of Padmasambhava. So the outer robe, which is brilliant red, a little bit like Ratnaprabha's top, brilliant, vibrant, glorious red, it symbolizes the Mahayana, the great vehicle, and the main emphasis on that practice is the practice of compassion, the experience of compassion. So what Padmasambhava does is the outer layer is compassion. He meets the world with compassion. And then the next one in is the yellow robe of the early monastic tradition. And really the emphasis in that tradition is on mindfulness, on awareness, on ethical discipline, on practice of the precepts. So it's a bit like it's a protector, isn't it? That kind of practice. It protects us from unskillfulness, and it protects others from unskillfulness. So that sort of is the middle layer of his clothing. And then the part that is closest to his body is the blue robe of the royal tantra. This sort of capacity to work with raw emotion, raw energy, and transform it like he did with the demons in Tibet, to transform it so that we can utilize the energy of those emotions towards our liberation. Yeah. And I've been thinking quite a lot about recently about total transformation. What does that mean? I've thought of myself as a Buddhist since I was 13. So I've been doing this for a long time, one way or another. And there are some things, I mean, in so many ways, my life is so much easier and happier. My mental states are better. I'm more able to, I think I'm more loving. I think I'm more kind. Hopefully I'm a bit more skillful. My own subjective experiences is much eased over the course of my practice. And yet, like I know that there are some hard knots, there are some tight places, there are some things that I keep coming up against over and over again in cycling around all the years of my practice. And I think the symbolism of the three robes is really helpful in the sense that we have an extraordinary array of tools and ways of engaging with ourselves and truth in our minds across the course of the tradition. And in Tibet, they talk about the 84,000 teachings. And one of the reasons why Padmasambhava is said to be like the precious guru is because he has mastered all of them, and therefore knows which one is appropriate now up against whatever the edges are of your own practice. So just thinking a bit personally at the moment, I feel like actually I've gone through a phase where it's been really important to mobilize a lot of my energy. I sort of feel a bit like I've been in the blue zone, like really cutting certain kinds of self-clinging away in order to have the energy to do something that I've felt has been really important to do, and really getting behind it and bringing as much of myself to a situation as possible. And I'm also aware at the moment that that's involved a process of desensitization a bit. In the sense that, like, to attend to suffering, one of the ways to do it is to sort of gain mastery and do something, you know, like just do something. So I've been doing something. But it also feels like actually I've lost a little bit of my sensitivity in that approach. And it feels like in terms of myself and other people. So one of the obvious symptoms of that is that actually I've hurt my body quite a lot, overworking and overstretching myself a little bit. I don't mean overstretching myself literally, I mean just working, doing the opposite, sitting very still for many hours. And it's a bit like I've lost a certain kind of awareness of my body while doing that. And I haven't been very kind to myself or very aware of myself as part of a system that needs to be looked after. So I feel like, oh, okay, like now I'm just coming to the point where I'm realizing actually compassion is really essential. Like if I'm not kinder to in my own experience, I'm going to burn out, which I don't want to do. And it's not good for it's not good for the situation. And I need much more awareness, and particularly awareness of my body and its needs, just in terms of its own sort of requirements, food and sleep and like movement and things. So it's a bit like, oh, okay, like we all actually have, as we go through our trainings on the Buddhist path, more and more resources to work with. And sometimes it can help to put yourself in front of Padmasambhava or the Buddha and ask him to take a look and see what the smile says, you know, see what the kindness of that encounter opens up for you, and see what it is that you might have forgotten or needed to do differently or have lost track of in order to really be able to do what's important to you somehow. So I'll go back to that quote again to finish up. Yeah. Descend with the view while ascending with the conduct. It's most essential to practice these two as a unity. So the more that we're able to recognize the adventitious defilements, and the more that we're able to see in each other the possibilities of liberation, and therefore bring compassion to those defilements, of the experience of those defilements, the more that we will be able to act in ways that help ourselves and others to free themselves from those greed and hatred and delusion. And the more, therefore, that we will be able to connect with, experience ourselves and others in our jewel-like quality. And it's iterative, isn't it? Like, you know, if you're in very small example, if you're driving and you let somebody into the traffic, it's, I can't remember what it was, 34% more likely, I'm just making that up, that the next person will let somebody else into the traffic, right? We're talking about pratitya samutpada, we're creating conditions that create conditions that create conditions. And the more that we're able to see each other in the light of witnessing potential and love, the more we're able to liberate the conditions that will liberate each other. And that's really the great task of transformation, both for us individually and in relation to each other in a Sangha like this. So I hope that you are able to develop a relationship with Padmasambhava over the years. And I hope that you're able to meet him and to benefit from his 3 robes and his ability to see you and the smile and the danger of the smile. And I hope that today you, us here, are able to enjoy witnessing this kind of beauty of commitment and exposure and preciousness that happens in the Mitra ceremony. And I hope some of you are able to stay online to be part of that ceremony today. So thank you very much. Sadhu.